Greetings, my YouTube friends. Welcome back. I'm Logan Albright, and I'm here with another book review for your viewing pleasure. Today I'm talking about the 1969 Agatha Christie Hercule Poirot mystery, Hallowe'en Party. And you'll notice I pronounce the apostrophe in Hallowe'en Party as a glottal stop, because why wouldn't you? It's there. You might as well pronounce it, right? This is the third Hercule Poirot mystery I've read. The first being Murder on the Orient Express, which I thought I did a review of, but apparently I didn't because I can't find it on my channel. One of my viewers pointed that out to me, so I apologize for that. It apparently doesn't exist. Maybe I'll do one at some point, but not anytime soon. And the second being Death on the Nile, which I thought was going to be a movie that was coming out, but then it never did, and who knows if it ever will, because of this crazy, ridiculous situation we find ourselves in America. So, I moved on and I read Hallowe'en Party, and the reason I read this one out of the many, many options I can choose is because I love Halloween. And I know it's out of season, it's January. I should have read this in October, but I didn't. So I read it in January, and I thought it was really good. I enjoyed it a lot. What I want to talk about primarily with it, because a lot of the Agatha Christie books are fairly similar. You know, a lot of the Hercule Poirot mysteries, they have a kind of similar layout. They set up a murder, they set up a mystery, Hercule Poirot comes in, he talks to everybody, and he solves it. Not a lot of variety there. But what I found interesting about this one and what I want to talk about is that this was written in 1969. This was a late Hercule Poirot mystery. It's actually the third to final one. And so it has a very different flavor than a lot of her other books. You tend to think of Agatha Christie as being sort of this like 1930s writer, and her mysteries being set in like 1930s society. You know, people are traveling across Asia by train. People are doing like leisure trips down the Nile on a boat. You just don't think of it as being modern at all. And I guess 1969 is not particularly modern by today's standards, but it's more modern, and it's got a lot of cultural references that I found a little bit jarring in this book, because you just don't expect them. The main one being that when they're at a Halloween party, someone mentions the taking of LSD, and they said, oh, I guess it's a party, maybe somebody brought LSD. And they just say it casually. First of all, like, LSD is not a big deal, which I don't know what the culture around that was like in 1969. I don't know if everybody was just taking LSD and it was nothing. Agatha Christie seems to think it wasn't a big deal. They mention it kind of casually. And I just found it so strange to have a reference to LSD in an Agatha Christie book. And then there's just like slang terms that are used. Like, I remember they used the term sexy a couple times. And I'm like, why is the term sexy being used in an Agatha Christie book? This just is wrong, you know? It feels like I know she's not a Victorian author, she's later than that, but she feels like a somewhat Victorian author. And you expect a certain set of kind of Victorian mores and a certain restraint. And so having that kind of language, having kind of 1960s slang, having 1960s drugs in an Agatha Christie book, I found very bizarre. Not necessarily bad. I mean, I actually liked the book a lot. I really enjoyed the book. I think it's a great one. If you're going to read an Agatha Christie book, you should read this one. Maybe not as your first book. You should read some other ones first to get more of a sense of the flavor. But you should definitely read this one because it was a lot of fun. And I like the reference to Halloween. There's a Halloween party with all kinds of party games. And they're interesting party games. They're games that I have not played for the most part. I've done Bobbing for Apples, which is the kind of centerpiece game. But they play a game called Snapdragon, which is apparently soaking raisins in alcohol and setting them on fire and then trying to grab them with your fingers and thinking it's funny to be burned by that. I've never heard of this game. Maybe it's an English thing. It sounds ridiculous. But I found that kind of funny. So yeah, the basic setup is that there's a Halloween party and there's a murder that takes place, and Hercule Poirot comes to investigate the murder. It takes place in England, like most of the Hercule Poirot mysteries do. Well, I guess that's not true. I think of them as taking place in England because all the characters are English apart from Hercule Poirot. He's Belgian. But, you know, the other two I mentioned, neither of them took place in England. They took place abroad. And so, but I tend to think of them as taking place in England. This one actually does take place in England. So it's got a very English character. And if you're like me and a bit of an Anglophile, you'll enjoy the Englishness of it. The other interesting thing about this being a later Hercule Poirot mystery is that the character ages along with the author. And, you know, it's not like a comic book character like Superman or something who just stays the same age forever. He gets older, and he's got gray around the temples, and he's dyeing his hair to keep it from looking gray, and he's complaining about aches and pains. And you have kind of this more fatigued detective rather than someone who's kind of young and anxious to make his mark on the world. He's made his mark, and he's sort of done, and he doesn't really want to do it anymore, but he does it as a favor for a friend. And I always find that kind of progression interesting. It's one of the things I love about the James Bond novels as opposed to the James Bond movies. In the James Bond novels, there's a definite character arc for Bond, where he starts out as a hotshot secret agent ready to take on the world, and as he has to kill more people and double-cross more people and do more dirty business of being a spy, he becomes jaded and bitter and a little bit sociopathic. Just from not being in a position to care about human life. And I love that. I love that development where you get the character going through a transformation from hero almost to villain. It's like that old quote. I can't remember who said the quote, but the quote is, either you die a hero or you live long enough to become a villain. And I think that's a great kind of reference for James Bond. It's weird that I'm talking about James Bond because I started talking about Hercule Poirot, but I think the characters are a little bit similar in that regard, where Poirot does get older and he gets tireder, and you can see kind of his character going through a transformation and changing the way he sees the world a little bit. So yeah, I don't want to go into too much about like the plot of this, because this is the way that these books work, is they just set up a murder and then you have to figure out what happens, and it's a little bit of a puzzle. I will say, comparing this one to an earlier book like Murder on the Orient Express, I think that her writing has gotten a little bit better. One thing I found about Murder on the Orient Express was that it was a little bit almost not even like a novel. It was like a puzzle. They just have all the information that you need laid out for you in this very expository style. And it almost just feels like a dossier or something rather than an actual story you're reading. This one reads a little bit more like a novel, and I like that better. I found it a little bit odd in the earlier books how there's just, very little story. It's just, here's a set of facts. Here's where this character was. Here's what their alibi was. Here's what their motive was. Solve the puzzle. And I didn't like that as well. So I like that she's kind of progressed into more of a storyteller. I also like the atmosphere of this book. In addition to the Halloween party, there's a little bit of a pagan vibe to it. There's some English countryside. There's a kind of mansion with a mysterious garden. There's a lot of children involved, which gives it both an innocence and kind of a creepiness to it, because, the death of children is obviously more horrific than the death of adults. So that's something to be concerned about and something to think about when you're reading the book. So I like the atmosphere of it a lot. There was a little bit of dread and creepiness to it that I think some of her other books don't have. I wouldn't call it a horror novel by any stretch of the imagination. It's definitely still a mystery, but it's got a little bit of that creepiness that one would associate with Halloween, and I like that too. So that's what I thought of Halloween Party. I really enjoyed it. I've liked all the Agatha Christie books I've read up to this point. I probably will read all of them at some point, but I'm not going to do reviews of all of them because, as I said, they get a little bit samey. But there's a huge long list on the back cover here of all these. These are just the Hercule Poirot ones. There's also the Miss Marple and the standalones to read too. Agatha Christie, a tremendously prolific writer, and it says on the back that the most widely published writer in the world. Billions of copies sold, which is pretty amazing. So if you are one of the billions of people who have not read Agatha Christie, I don't think you should start with Halloween Party, but I think you should get to it at some point because it's a good one, and it's really interesting to see the difference in the time span, the difference in the culture of the 1960s, the late 1960s in England, as opposed to like this kind of more imperial pre-war England that you see in the earlier books. So there you have it. I've been Logan Albright. This was a quick one, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. And I will be back again next week with another book review. If you enjoy this video, please like it. Please subscribe to the channel. Click the bell for notifications so I can keep making more of them for you every single week. And I would really appreciate that. Leave me a comment down below on your favorite Agatha Christie book and which one I should read next. And I'll catch you next time.